I lay there, hooked to machines, my body frail and forgotten, while my son and his wife were out toasting their love, celebrating their anniversary like I didn't even exist. The pain in my chest wasn't from the illness. It was from the betrayal. After all these years, all I had given them, they had given me nothing but silence. So I made sure their future would echo that silence forever. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The thought sliced through Clara Benson's mind as she blinked against the dim light of the hospital room. A steady beat from the heart monitor kept time with the quiet hiss of her IV drip, its plastic tube tugging faintly at her thin skin every time she shifted. The sheet smelled faintly of bleach, too crisp against her frail body. She lifted her head just enough to glimpse the empty visitor's chair beside her bed. A chair that hadn't been filled all night. The night nurse, a woman with soft sneakers that squeaked faintly on the polished floor, slipped in to check her vitals. "You're stable," the nurse said kindly, adjusting the machine. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "By the way, I saw something online. I think your son is celebrating." Clara frowned. "Celebrating?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. The nurse hesitated, then pulled out her phone. A glowing screen was angled toward Clara. A picture of her son David, his arm wrapped around Monica, both of them smiling wide in low golden light. The caption under the post burned her eyes. "Anniversary dinner with my love. Nothing else matters tonight. Nothing else matters." Clara stared until her chest hollowed. The nurse, embarrassed, tucked her phone away and whispered, "Try to rest." She left the room, her shoes fading into silence. Clara turned slowly onto her side, every bone protesting the movement. Her phone sat on the tray table. She reached with shaky fingers, pulled it close, and unlocked the screen. No missed calls, no messages. Not from David, not from Monica. Just silence. She tapped open Instagram, the screen glowing too brightly in the dim room. Monica's page bloomed with images, champagne flutes sweating with condensation, oysters on a bed of ice, Monica's manicured hand flashing with a diamond ring. The caption was smug, dripping with indulgence. "Cheers to forever, babe." Clara's throat tightened. She could almost taste the salt of those oysters, could almost hear the pop of the champagne cork, as though they were feasting in the very next room, while she lay tethered to machines. Her heart raced faster than the monitor's beep, and she set the phone back down with trembling hands. The door swung open without a knock. Joan Miller stepped in, hair cropped close, eyes sharp behind square glasses, her presence steady as always. She carried the faint scent of coffee and the brisk air of late evening. "Clara," Joan said, pulling the chair close to the bed. She set her handbag down with a thump. "I saw the pictures." Clara managed a thin smile. "Of course you did." Everyone did. Joan's jaw tightened. Her voice carried steel. "They should be ashamed. Leaving you alone here, bragging to the world out there." Clara's eyes flicked toward the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass, each drop echoing the emptiness in her chest. "Ashamed?" She let out a fragile laugh. "No, Joan. They're proud. Look at them, toasting to themselves." Not even a text. Joan leaned forward, clasping Clara's frail hand between her own. "You don't deserve this. You've given them everything. Your life, your savings, your patience." The words settled heavy in the room. Clara's eyes brimmed, but no tears fell. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising slow against the thin gown. Her voice came out quieter than the hum of the machines, yet heavier than anything else in that room. "I was empty to them." For a moment, the silence deepened. Only the fourth pump clicked softly, and the rain outside thickened into a harder patter. Joan sat rigid, as though restraining herself from storming out to confront David and Monica directly. But Clara's stillness carried more weight than rage ever could. She lifted her hand slightly, the motion slow, deliberate. Her eyes locked with Joan's, a calm determination glinting through the tired lines of her face. They've made it clear what I mean to them, Clara whispered. So I'll make their future just as clear. Her gaze drifted to the empty chair by the bed, to the untouched bouquet left earlier by a nurse, to the phone glowing faintly with images of oysters and champagne. A faint smile curled her lips. Not warm, not bitter, but resolute. Now, Clara whispered, her voice low, final, almost drowned by the rhythm of the rain. I'll make their future empty too. Clara Benson's house was quiet when she returned from the hospital. So quiet it almost startled her. The living room clock ticked with a hollow patience, and dust motes spun lazily through a shaft of afternoon light that cut across the carpet. Each step she took from the doorway to the kitchen echoed faintly, her cane tapping against the hardwood floor like a metronome for her thoughts. The stillness gave her no comfort. Instead, it sharpened the memory of Monica's champagne glass raised high, David's grin in that restaurant glow, and the caption that had stung her like a needle. Nothing else matters tonight. They toasted. She had lain alone. She hung her coat with slow precision and moved toward the cabinet tucked discreetly in the hallway. At the bottom, hidden behind stacks of folded linens, sat a small fireproof box, black, unyielding, weightier than its size suggested. She dragged it out, set it on the table, and turned the key she always wore on a chain around her neck. The latch clicked open with a sound that felt louder than it should have. Inside, documents waited in neat stacks. House deeds, savings bonds, insurance policies, and one thick envelope stamped with the bold lettering of her estate planning attorney's office. She pulled the envelope free, her fingers brushing the crisp edges, and slid the papers out onto the oak surface. There, in careful type, were the words that named David Benson as sole heir. No conditions, no clauses. Every cent, every asset, every keepsake would flow directly to the son who had chosen champagne over her IV drip. Clara's hand stilled on the paper. The silence around her grew louder. Pressing in from the corners of the room, a faint metallic taste rose in her mouth, part anger, part resolve. She pictured Monica's careful smiles, the way her daughter-in-law had dropped hints like breadcrumbs at family dinners. You know, Clara, you've worked so hard all your life. Maybe you should enjoy things now. Why not let David help you with your accounts? Early inheritance can be a blessing. A blessing for them. A hollowing for her. The front door opened, breaking the quiet. Joan Miller stepped in without ceremony, as she had done for decades. Her footsteps brisk, her perfume carrying the sharp edge of citrus. She spotted the spread of papers on the table and raised an eyebrow. So, you're digging through the vault? Clara didn't look up. She tapped a finger against David's name on the page. He's the one who gets it all. At least, he was. Joan's mouth twisted. She pulled out a chair and sat, her posture firm. You don't owe them a cent, Clara. Not after what they pulled while you were stuck in that bed. Clara exhaled slowly, her chest tightening with both fatigue and a rising clarity. The pages rustled under her palm, as if whispering for change. Maybe not, she said, her voice soft but sure. But these papers still say otherwise. The late afternoon sun shifted, spilling longer shadows across the table. The papers looked stark in that dimming light. Legal promises she no longer intended to keep. She spread them out, line by line, as if laying out a crime scene. Every signature, every clause, every cold sentence carried the weight of trust she had once placed in her son. She pressed her fingertips flat against the will, grounding herself. Her nails scraped lightly on the thick paper, a sound sharp in the silence. Then she straightened in her chair, her decision solidifying like concrete in her chest. With a slow movement, deliberate as surgery, Clara gathered the stack of documents and set them squarely in the center of the table. Her eyes lingered on them a moment longer before she reached for the phone beside her. Her voice, when she spoke, was even. Alan Pierce, please. Estate matters. The papers lay silent under her hand as the line began to ring, waiting to be rewritten. The fountain pen balanced between Clara's fingers felt strangely weighted. as if the ink inside carried years of sacrifice and silence. She sat in the polished calm of Alan Pierce's office, the faint scent of leather-bound books and oiled wood mixing with the whisper of the air conditioning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting sharp rectangles across the desk, where legal folders lay stacked with military precision. Alan Pierce, gray at the temples and deliberate in every movement, studied Clara with a patience that never felt rehearsed. He folded his hands on the blotter and said quietly, "You sounded certain on the phone." Clara's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Certain is all I've got left." She placed the envelope from her fireproof box on the desk. The will, still naming David as sole heir, slid out with a dull whisper. Her fingers lingered on the corner before she released it, as if dropping a stone into deep water. Alan adjusted his glasses and skimmed the first page. His expression betrayed nothing, but his brow lifted slightly at the bold print of David's name. "Your son still holds everything," he said, his tone professional yet edged with curiosity. "And you want to change that." Clara leaned back, the leather chair creaking faintly under her. "He left me alone in a hospital bed. While I lay hooked to machines, he posted oysters and champagne. Tell me, Alan, does that sound like a man who deserves my home, my savings, my life's work?" Her voice was calm, almost clinical, but beneath it a blade of pain gleamed. Alan closed the will, his fingers pressing flat against the paper. "We can restructure everything," he said. "Every cent, every clause, redistributed however you choose. David and his wife can be fully disinherited if that's your wish." The words landed like a verdict Clara had already known, but needed to hear spoken aloud. She exhaled, her gaze steady. "Then let it be so." "Strike them both out." Alan's pen tapped once against the blotter before he lifted a fresh set of forms from his drawer. He placed them before her, each line crisp and empty, waiting. "And who shall receive the estate, Mrs. Benson? You must decide not only who loses, but who gains." The room filled with the faint scratch of the pen as he wrote, his handwriting elegant and unhurried. Clara's eyes drifted to the certificates framed on his wall, to the silent ticking of the brass clock behind him. She thought of her decades as a nurse, the long nights, the steady hands, the young trainees she had guided when exhaustion bent them. She thought of the foundation that once sent her textbooks when she could barely afford rent. "The hospital," Clara said finally, her voice low but firm. "A scholarship fund. For nurses who come after me. Let them inherit what matters." Alan looked up, meeting her gaze directly. For the first time, his composure softened, a flicker of respect passing through his expression. "A wise legacy," he murmured. He made careful notes, the pen's nib whispering across the paper like a quiet agreement. Clara's fingers tightened on the armrest. "They left me alone," she said, the words steady now, without tremor. "So I'll leave them nothing." Silence settled, heavy and certain. Outside the office, faint city noise drifted in, the hum of traffic, the distant horn of a cab, the low rumble of footsteps in the hall. But in that room, the world narrowed to the shuffle of papers and the deepening of Clara's resolve. Alan turned the final page, sliding it across the desk with measured care. The pen rested in its holder, gleaming under the light. His eyes lingered on Clara, reading more than her words. "Mrs. Benson," he said at last, his tone deliberate, "do you want this filed immediately?" The question hung in the air, weighty as the pen itself, the future waiting at the tip of her hand. The stamp landed on the page with a crisp smack, the sound echoing like a gavel through Alan Pierce's office. Clara sat across the polished desk, watching as each amendment was signed, notarized, and sealed. The stack of papers, her future, her statement, her strike of judgment, grew heavier with every mark. Alan's voice was measured. "Everything is updated. David Benson and Monica Benson are no longer beneficiaries. Your estate will now fund the scholarship trust, as specified. I'll ensure copies are filed at the courthouse today." Clara pressed her palms lightly against the armrests of her chair, her body weary, but her heart unexpectedly light. A sense of quiet satisfaction spread through her, not triumphant but steady, like the calm after a storm. "So," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "the papers tell the truth now." Alan slid the final document into a thick envelope. "They do, and they'll hold in any court." When Clara stepped out of the building, the autumn air hit her cheeks, cool and fragrant with damp leaves. Cars hummed along the street, and a woman hurried past carrying a bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in paper. Clara drew her coat tighter, clutching her handbag where the sealed envelope rested, and made her slow but steady way home. Later that afternoon, in her kitchen, she settled at the small wooden table by the window. The sunlight angled through, catching dust motes in midair like glitter. She set the envelope down in front of her, ran her hand over the crisp paper, and allowed herself a single deep breath. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification lit the screen. Monica Benson, posting again. Clara's hand hesitated, then picked up the phone. The image filled her screen, Monica in oversized sunglasses, clinking a mimosa glass against David's. The caption read, "Brunch date, celebrating love all week long." Blessed. Clara stared at the photo until the corners of her mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Joan arrived just as Clara set the phone aside. She breezed in with her coat unbuttoned, a faint smell of rain clinging to her clothes. Joan dropped her bag on the chair and leaned over to squint at the phone, still glowing on the counter. "Celebrating on your hospital bed," she muttered. Her jaw tightened, her voice edged with contempt. "They're parading around while you've been fighting to walk steady again." Clara's expression remained calm, though her hand hovered protectively over the envelope. "They can celebrate whatever they want. Their names are nowhere on these pages anymore." The phone buzzed again, this time a call. David's name flashed across the screen. Clara let it ring out, her face unreadable. Moments later, a voicemail notification blinked. She didn't listen to it. Instead, she slid the envelope from her bag and carried it carefully down the hallway. Her safe stood at the back of her bedroom closet, tucked discreetly beneath old winter coats. She turned the dial with deliberate patience, the clicks loud in the quiet house. When the door swung open, the dark steel interior greeted her. Inside, the old will lay flat, soon to be replaced. Clara slipped the revised documents in, stacked them neatly, and shut the safe with a final spin of the dial. The metallic thunk reverberated through the room, final and certain. Back in the kitchen, Joan poured 2 cups of coffee, the scent rich and grounding. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she asked. Clara lifted her cup, the warmth soothing her palms. "It feels right," she answered. Her gaze drifted toward the phone, still silent now, lying face down. The moment stretched, quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then, suddenly, the phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, but a ringtone reserved for only one contact. Alan Pierce. Clara exchanged a look with Joan before answering. Alan's voice was calm, but carried an urgency that cut through the static. "Clara," he said, "David just filed paperwork with the county. He's listed himself as your financial caretaker." The coffee cup trembled in Clara's hand, dark liquid rippling against porcelain. The envelope might have been sealed, the will airtight, but David wasn't finished. Clara sat rigid at her kitchen table, Alan's voice still ringing in her ears. The words had landed with the weight of betrayal sharpened into something almost absurd. David had filed paperwork declaring himself her financial caretaker. It wasn't legal, not in any binding way, but the audacity of it left her breathless. Her coffee sat untouched, steam curling upward in soft tendrils. Joan leaned against the counter, arms folded tight. Caretaker. The same man who couldn't be bothered to sit by your hospital bed. Her tone was edged with disbelief, but her eyes carried fire. Alan had explained over the phone. David had gone to the county clerk's office, filled out forms, and submitted them as though he were stepping into his mother's finances by default. "It won't hold," Alan had assured her, "but it muddies the waters. Banks, utilities, even insurance. Some may hesitate until it's challenged formally. Clara listened, silent at first, her thumb tracing circles against the rim of her mug. Finally, she lifted her gaze, steady and cold. He thinks silence is permission. He thinks he can rewrite my life the way he rewrites his Instagram captions. The next morning proved Alan right. Clara checked her mailbox and found a letter from her homeowner's insurance company, politely requesting clarification of financial authority. The lines blurred across the page as she read, her chest tightening. David's paperwork was already causing ripples. Meanwhile, Monica was busy parading the illusion. At a brunch downtown, pictures already spreading online, she leaned across the table toward a friend, mimosa in hand. "We're already managing her estate," she said brightly. The words caught on a passing server's ear before making their way through whispered channels. Monica's sunglasses reflected her own smile in the restaurant's polished windows, her voice full of smug certainty. By evening, Joan had heard the gossip from a neighbor. She stormed into Clara's living room, dropping her purse on the couch with a heavy thud. "She's telling people they're in charge already. Can you believe that? They're painting themselves as saviors. While you're sitting here holding the real papers," Clara sat in her armchair, the afternoon light casting sharp lines across her face. "They're managing nothing," she said evenly. Her voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Alan moved quickly. Within 2 days, he had filed a formal objection with the county clerk, citing fraudulent misrepresentation. His language in the brief was clinical and precise, but his call to Clara carried the faint edge of restrained anger. He knew this wouldn't stand, Alan told her. He did it anyway, hoping confusion would give him access. Clara pressed the receiver to her ear, her hand steady. "Let him choke on that paperwork," she replied. Joan, seated across from her at the table, cracked a smile at that. "That's the Clara I know." No hesitation, no surrender. But Clara's resolve was tested faster than either of them expected. The following week, she received an alert from her bank. At first, she thought it was another routine notice. A balance update, perhaps. She opened it with the detached calm of someone who had grown used to bills and statements. Then her eyes caught the bolded line, attempted withdrawal, $5,000, flagged for review. Her chest constricted, her hand tightening on the paper until it crinkled. She scanned further, and the words confirmed the unthinkable. The attempt had been made by David Benson, claiming access as a family account holder. The sound of the grandfather clock in her hallway suddenly felt deafening, each tick like a hammer. The smell of dinner rolls Joan had brought over hours earlier turned heavy in her stomach. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She dropped the notice onto the table, her fingers trembling slightly despite her effort to appear calm. Joan leaned over, eyes narrowing as she read. "He didn't," she breathed. Then, louder, furious, "That bastard tried to bleed you dry." Clara reached for the paper again, her voice level even as her knuckles whitened around the edge. "He's not just muddying waters anymore," she said. Her eyes, sharp now, glinted with something harder than pain. "He's reaching straight into my veins for cash." The room fell into silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down like a storm about to break. The next morning, she sat across from a bank officer in a quiet branch office. The blinds filtered in pale light, striping the desk in alternating shadows. The air smelled faintly of toner and carpet cleaner. The officer adjusted his tie nervously as he scrolled through Clara's account on his monitor. "Mrs. Benson, the system flagged the withdrawal because the claim of shared family account didn't match our records. There's no joint ownership here." Clara folded her hands, her nails pressing into her palm. "But he tried." The officer hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." He presented himself with confidence. "We reported it as attempted fraud, but it complicates things." Clara's cane rested against the edge of the chair. She tapped it once, sharp against the tile. "Then we'll uncomplicate it. Freeze every account. Nothing moves without my say." The officer nodded, scribbling notes. We can add a second layer of authorization. Is there someone you trust enough to be a co-signer for all transactions? Clara didn't need to think. Alan Pierce, my attorney by that afternoon. The system was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Every transfer, every check, every withdrawal now required two signatures, hers and Alan's. It was protection, but also a declaration. The money David thought was within reach had been pulled out of his grasp, sealed behind walls he couldn't climb. News traveled faster than Clara expected. That evening, Monica's voice rang out through social media, captured on a friend's video at a patio gathering. She's paranoid, Monica sneered, twirling the stem of a wine glass, locking down accounts like some conspiracy theorist. It's pathetic. We're her family, but she treats us like enemies. Joan was the one who showed Clara the clip, her finger stabbing at the phone screen. Paranoid? Joan barked. This is precision, Clara. You're not unraveling. You're finally putting them in their place. Clara set the phone aside without comment, her face composed, but her heart pulsing fast beneath her ribs. She thought of the years she'd handed David $50 bills, just to tide him over. The checks slipped into birthday cards for Monica. The holidays she carried the weight of the bill. How easily they had grown entitled to her generosity, and how bitter they became when it stopped. The bank officer called the next morning with a clipped update. Because David's attempt had crossed into fraud territory, the report had been escalated. There would be documentation filed in court. Clara listened, her lips pressed thin, and thanked him for the diligence. When she hung up, her fingers trembled slightly against the receiver. Joan came over with groceries, her presence grounding. She unloaded bags into the fridge, the smell of oranges and bread filling the kitchen. Let him explain this one to a judge, Joan said. He won't just be embarrassed this time. He'll be exposed. Clara leaned against the counter, steadying herself, her cane nearby. Every choice he makes digs him deeper, she murmured. And still, he keeps digging. But David's arrogance hadn't hit its ceiling yet. That night, Clara's phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. She hesitated, staring at the screen, her reflection faint in the glass. Finally, she pressed play. Her son's voice filled the kitchen, not apologetic, not pleading, but sharp with entitlement. Mom, this is ridiculous. Freezing me out like I'm some stranger? If you don't sign things over soon, Monica and I will contest everything. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The words crackled with menace, each syllable like a nail hammering into wood. Clara lowered the phone slowly, her hand steady even as her chest burned with both hurt and resolve. The message ended, but its echo hung in the room. Sign things over, or we'll contest. The storm had stopped pretending to be clouds. It was here. The voicemail still echoed in Clara's ears when she pressed the speaker button on her phone the following morning. Alan Pierce sat across from her at his office table, his pen poised above a legal pad. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, steam curling from a fresh cup set between them. David's voice spilled into the room, sharp and entitled. If you don't sign things over soon, Monica and I will contest everything. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Alan's jaw tightened, though his tone remained even. This isn't negotiation. This is intimidation. He scribbled a quick note, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet office. We'll add it to the case file. Judges don't look kindly on threats, especially when directed at an elderly parent. Clara folded her hands in her lap, her fingers trembling slightly, though her gaze never wavered. He thinks fear will do what guilt couldn't, she said, but fear is wasted on me now. Alan looked at her carefully, as though assessing not just her words but the steel beneath them. He nodded once, then slid the recorder back toward her. Keep every message, every letter. Paper is patient, Mrs. Benson, but it never forgets. That evening, Joan arrived with a tote bag full of manila folders. She set them on Clara's dining table with the thud of someone carrying bricks. Time to get organized, Joan declared, pulling out the first stack. We're not letting him twist a single thing. The two women spent hours cataloging every document, receipts, bank notices, correspondence from the hospital. even birthday cards, where Clara had written checks David claimed to have forgotten. Each page was slipped into protective sleeves, labeled in Joan's sharp handwriting, and filed into binders that lined the table like soldiers. As they worked, the steady tick of the grandfather clock filled the house, punctuated by the crinkle of paper and the occasional sigh. At one point, Joan paused, looking up from a stack of deposit slips. "Do you ever get tired, Clara? Tired of fighting?" Clara adjusted her glasses and slid a paper neatly into its sleeve. "I was tired in that hospital bed," she answered, "but not now. Now I'm awake." The following week, Clara visited the Hospital Foundation office. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon polish, familiar and oddly comforting. She was ushered into a modest conference room, where the foundation director and a young nurse met her with warm smiles. The nurse leaned forward, her voice earnest. "Your name on this scholarship will mean more than money. It'll mean possibility." Hope Clara clasped her hands on the table, her shoulders straightening. "That's the point," she said. The words came without hesitation, and for the first time in weeks, her chest felt unburdened. Here was something her son could neither steal nor tarnish, a future carved for strangers who might one day sit beside hospital beds, the way she once had. After the meeting, she walked slowly through the hospital corridor, her cane tapping softly against the linoleum. The faint scent of antiseptic mixed with cafeteria coffee carried her back to nights on shift. Blood pressure cuffs, hissing, call lights buzzing, voices whispering down the hall. She remembered the faces of patients who had clung to her hand, grateful not for gifts, but for presence. That was what David had denied her, presence, and that was what she would give to others instead. When she returned home, Joan was already waiting, a pot of stew simmering on the stove, filling the kitchen with the earthy aroma of carrots and thyme. They sat together at the table, the warmth of the food grounding them both. For a while, the world outside, the threats, the fraud, the arrogance, seemed far away, but peace never lasted long. Near dusk, Clara heard the mail slot creak open. Envelopes slid onto the floor with a soft shuffle. She rose carefully, cane in hand, and bent to collect them. Among the ordinary bills and catalogs lay one thick envelope, stamped with the county court's insignia. She tore it open slowly, the paper rasping beneath her fingers. Her eyes scanned the first line, and her stomach tightened. Petition for competency hearing, filed by David Benson. The stew cooled on the table as Clara gripped the page, her pulse echoing in her ears. Her son hadn't just threatened to contest her will, he was now trying to strip her of her very mind. The courtroom petition sat like a bruise on Clara's dining table, its legal phrasing designed to strip her down to fragility, incompetent. The word hissed at her like an accusation. David's filing claimed that her recent hospital stay meant she could no longer manage her own affairs. It wasn't just about her money anymore. It was about erasing her voice. Alan Pierce wasted no time arranging an independent evaluation. "We'll cut this off at the root," he said, sliding the petition back into its envelope. His tone carried both precision and restrained fury. "If David thinks one fall and a hospital bracelet disqualify you from decision-making, he's about to be educated." The evaluation took place in a private office downtown. Clara sat across from Dr. Ramirez, a physician with silver-rimmed glasses and a calm, assessing gaze. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and coffee, the air warm but not stifling. A notepad lay between them, pages blank and waiting. "Mrs. Benson," Dr. Ramirez began, "this is about clarity of thought, not physical health. I'll ask questions, and I want you to answer as naturally as you can." Clara adjusted her posture, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her cane rested against the chair, but she didn't lean on it. She wanted nothing to hint at frailty. "What year is it?" 2025, she answered without hesitation. "And who is the current governor of the state?" Clara answered, adding a pointed remark about his most recent policy proposal. Dr. Ramirez's eyebrow lifted in quiet amusement before continuing. Can you recall 3 words I'll give you now? Tulip, glass, lantern, and repeat them back in a few minutes. Of course. She let the words settle like seeds in her mind. The evaluation stretched for nearly an hour: arithmetic, short-term memory, problem-solving, even drawing a clock face. Clara moved through it with deliberate precision, her answers crisp, her wit occasionally peeking through. At one point, when asked to interpret a proverb, she replied, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and I change my will." Dr. Ramirez chuckled, scribbling a note. By the time he asked her to recall the 3 words, Clara recited them in order and added, "And if you'd like them alphabetized, I can do that too." When the evaluation ended, Dr. Ramirez set his pen down and leaned back. "Mrs. Benson," he said, his voice firm, "you're sharper than most people half your age. I'll file my report today." Clara allowed herself a small smile. For once, paperwork would work in her favor. A week later, Alan stood beside her in Judge Caldwell's courtroom, affidavit in hand. The chamber smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the air cooled by vents humming overhead. David and Monica sat at the opposite table, Monica's sunglasses perched uselessly on her head, David's knee bouncing nervously beneath the desk. Judge Caldwell, a woman with stern eyes and no patience for theatrics, adjusted her glasses as Alan submitted the affidavit. "Independent evaluation confirms Mrs. Benson is fully competent," Alan stated. "Sharp, alert, beyond dispute." The judge flipped through the file, her expression unreadable. Then she set it down and fixed her gaze on David. "Case dismissed," she declared, her gavel striking once. The sound cracked through the room, final and uncompromising. David's face flushed red. Monica leaned toward him, muttering just loud enough for Clara to hear, "She's manipulating everyone." Clara rose slowly, steadying herself on her cane, and walked out of the courtroom with her head high. Each step echoed like punctuation, her dignity intact, her authority reaffirmed. But victory was always short-lived. The very next afternoon, as Clara sorted through her mail, she found a message from Alan waiting on her answering machine. His tone was calm, but the words carried another weight. "Clara, David's shifting tactics. He's claiming you promised him certain heirlooms, jewelry, silver, family keepsakes. He's already submitted a statement." Clara's eyes narrowed, her hand hovering above the receiver long after the message ended. Her son had tried to take her money, her mind, her independence. Now he was clawing at her history, and something inside her told her this time. He wouldn't just make claims. He'd already taken something. Clara knew the absence before she saw it. A gap on the shelf in her bedroom, faint dust outlines where boxes had rested for years, told her something was wrong. She leaned closer, her cane steadying her, and the sight confirmed it. 2 velvet jewelry boxes were gone. Her grandmother's silver bracelet, the cameo brooch her late husband had given her on their 10th anniversary. Both missing, as if lifted straight out of her past. Her stomach hollowed. She never moved those pieces. They had been fixtures of her life, stored carefully, visited occasionally, treasured always. To see the space bare felt like walking into a home where all the photographs had been stripped from the walls. She didn't need to ask who had been in her house. David had a key. That evening, Clara called Alan. Her voice was calm, but every syllable cut clean. "He didn't just file papers this time. He took from me, from this house." Alan's response was measured but urgent. "We'll trace them. Pawn shops log everything by law." 2 days later, Clara and Alan walked into a pawn shop tucked on a side street, its front window crowded with guitars, watches, and tarnished picture frames. The air inside smelled of metal and dust, thick with the tang of old coins. A man behind the counter flipped through a ledger, his expression guarded. Until Alan produced his credentials, the pawn shop owner pulled out a drawer, setting 2 items gently on the counter. The silver bracelet, its clasp still worn from Clara's years of wearing it. The cameo brooch, dulled slightly under the fluorescent lights, but unmistakable. Clara's breath caught, her hand trembling as she reached toward them. She didn't touch, not yet. "These were sold here?" Alan asked. The man nodded. "Last week. ID matched a David Benson." The confirmation sliced through Clara. Proof, in black ink and signatures, that her son had pawned not just valuables, but the keepsakes of her bloodline. Police reports followed quickly, Alan guiding Clara through the process with the precision of a surgeon. Officers photographed the jewelry, logged it, and promised their safe return after the case moved forward. Clara watched the items sealed into evidence bags, her reflection warped in the plastic. Back in court weeks later, Judge Caldwell reviewed the evidence with a steely expression. David sat across the aisle, his tie askew, Monica whispering furiously in his ear. The judge's gavel struck once. "This isn't just greed. It's criminal," she said, her tone cutting through the chamber. David's face tightened, a flicker of panic breaking through his practiced indifference. Monica looked away, her lips pressed so thin they nearly disappeared. Joan, seated beside Clara, leaned close and whispered, "He pawned his last ounce of peace." Clara didn't respond. She kept her gaze on the jewelry resting in clear evidence bags on the clerk's table. She thought of her grandmother's hands fastening that bracelet decades ago, of her husband's careful smile as he'd pinned the brooch to her blouse. These weren't trinkets. They were chapters, and David had tried to sell them for pocket change. After the hearing, Alan escorted Clara back to his office. He set the recovered jewelry gently on the desk, sliding it toward her. "They'll be returned to you soon," he said, "but I suspect their real weight isn't in possession anymore. It's in what they've revealed." Clara studied the bracelet, its silver catching the late sun streaming through the blinds. "He thought he was selling metal," she murmured, "but what he sold was trust. And that can't be bought back." Alan leaned forward. "You have every right to amend your will again. If you'd like to ensure he never benefits from your estate in any way, we can add stronger clauses. You could even redirect more toward the hospital foundation. Make his absence echo louder." Clara's hand hovered over the bracelet before she withdrew it, leaving the silver untouched. Her gaze lifted, steady and unflinching. "Then let's do that," she said. "Double the donations. Every theft he makes, I'll answer with a gift he can never claim." Alan nodded, pulling a fresh set of papers from his drawer. The scratch of his pen filled the room, deliberate, final. Clara sat back, her eyes drifting to the jewelry glinting faintly on the desk. For the first time, she realized they no longer tied her to the past. They tethered David to his downfall. As Alan slid the amended will across the desk for her review, Clara signed without hesitation. The pen glided across the page, her signature anchoring every word. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. The air in the office seemed lighter, freer. But even as she sealed David's absence in ink, she knew he wouldn't accept defeat quietly. The papers lay before her, doubled donations inked in fresh black lines, when a shadow of unease brushed her thoughts. David had stolen silver. What would he try to steal next? The conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and ink, the kind of sterile precision that made decisions feel permanent. Clara sat at the end of Alan Pierce's long oak table, the will spread open before her. A fresh addendum clipped neatly to the back. The papers gleamed under the overhead lights, their language sharp, unyielding, and final. Alan uncapped his pen and placed it in front of her. "This locks everything," he said. "The hospital foundation is now your majority beneficiary. David and Monica are completely excluded, and the no contest clause ensures they gain nothing by fighting." Clara lifted the pen. Its weight felt strangely familiar now, no longer heavy with doubt, but steady with resolve. She signed her name in sweeping strokes, each letter pressed into the page as though she were carving it in stone. The silence stretched as Alan gathered the papers, sliding them into crisp folders, his motions deliberate. Across the table, Joan leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, eyes glinting. Well, she said dryly, they'll never eat at your table again. Clara exhaled, the corners of her mouth curving faintly. No, Joan. They'll have to find another feast outside. The world was less composed. Within days, Monica's complaints found their way into the public sphere. At brunch, in boutiques, even whispered near church steps, her voice carried. She's ruining our family. Who disinherits their only child? Who leaves a legacy to strangers over blood? One video clip surfaced online. Monica standing outside a trendy cafe, her sunglasses perched on her head, her tone theatrical. She's rewriting history, Monica declared to whoever would listen. David has given everything for her, and this is how she repays him? It's cruel. Joan watched the clip on her phone, lips pressed tight, then looked at Clara. Funny, she said. I don't recall David giving you much beyond headaches and overdraft notices. Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence in her living room was louder than Monica's theatrics. The papers were already filed. Her ink already dried. Alan finalized the addendum 2 days later. He slid the completed file across his desk toward Clara, the embossed seal pressed into the top corner. It's airtight now, he assured her. No gray area. No loopholes. Even if they drag this into court, the no contest clause will strip them of any foothold. Clara nodded, her fingers brushing the raised seal. The paper was cold, but it carried warmth all the same, a protection she had built for herself, a shield against the two people who should have been her protectors, but had chosen to be predators. Alan stacked the folders neatly, locking them into his cabinet with a firm twist of the key. This is more than legal armor, he said. It's the story of your choice, in black and white. They can howl all they like, but the documents won't move. Clara's reply was simple. Then let them howl. That evening, she and Joan sat in the kitchen, sipping tea as the kettle steamed faintly on the stove. The air smelled of chamomile and honey. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window, the rhythm almost soothing. Joan clinked her spoon against the cup and said, You've outmaneuvered them at every turn. What's left for them to try? Clara stared into the swirl of her tea, her reflection bending in the liquid. Desperation, she said quietly. And desperation doesn't respect limits. She wasn't wrong. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived, hand-delivered, its edges creased as if handled too tightly. Clara carried it to the kitchen table, slid it open with a butter knife, and unfolded the letter inside. David's handwriting sprawled across the page, uneven, hurried. She read each line, her jaw tightening with every word. The letter wasn't apology, wasn't plea. It was warning. If you ruin us, you'll regret it. The kettle whistled faintly behind her, but Clara didn't move. She held the letter in her hands, the ink bleeding slightly where David had pressed too hard. His words weren't just anger, they were a promise. The letter still smelled faintly of ink and rain-soaked paper when Clara slid it into a manila envelope. She didn't linger over the words anymore. If you ruin us, you'll regret it, because they no longer shook her. They were fuel. With her coat buttoned against the February chill, she carried the envelope to Alan Pierce's office as though she were carrying evidence of a crime scene. Alan read the letter once, then again. His jaw tightened, and he set it flat on the desk, pressing his palm against the page as though pinning it in place. He wrote this in his own hand? Yes, Clara replied evenly. Every word. Alan's pen scratched across his legal pad, the sound sharp in the still office. Then it's not just intimidation. It's self-incrimination. He slid the letter into a clear plastic sleeve, sealed it with practiced precision, and placed it in the growing binder of exhibits. We'll present it at the next hearing. Judges don't like threats masquerading as family correspondence. Clara sat, straighter in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. Good. He wanted me frightened. Instead, he's handed me proof. When court convened the following week, the room buzzed with restless energy. The wooden benches creaked under the shifting weight of spectators, their whispers filling the air like a swarm. David sat at the defense table, his shoulders squared too rigidly, a red flush creeping up his neck. Monica perched beside him, her posture brittle, her nails tapping impatiently against the table. Alan rose first. His voice was calm, but his words sliced with precision. Your Honor, this letter, written by David Benson, constitutes direct intimidation of the testator. He held up the plastic sleeve, the inked threat stark and undeniable. It is not merely poor judgment. It is coercion by threat. And it speaks volumes about intent. Judge Caldwell took the letter, her eyes scanning each jagged line. Her lips thinned as she read, the courtroom falling silent around her. Then she set it down with a sharp motion, her gaze pinning David where he sat. Mr. Benson, she said, her tone low and edged with steel. Threatening your mother in writing while engaged in ongoing estate proceedings is reckless at best and contemptuous at worst. This court will not tolerate intimidation. David shifted in his seat, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came. His hand clenched on the table, knuckles white. Monica, however, erupted. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice ringing through the chamber. She's twisting everything, and you're letting her. He's her son. Judge Caldwell banged her gavel once, the crack silencing the room. Mrs. Benson's competency has already been affirmed. Your husband's conduct is now under scrutiny. If you cannot contain yourself, you may step outside. Monica's face blazed crimson. She shoved her chair back, its legs screeching across the floor, and stormed toward the exit. The heavy doors banged shut behind her, leaving a ringing echo in her wake. Beside Clara, Joan leaned in, her voice low but steady. Pieces evaporating fast. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Then let it evaporate, she murmured. It leaves the truth behind. The session ended with the letter entered formally into evidence. Alan guided Clara from the courthouse, his briefcase heavier now, but his stride lighter. Outside, the cold air snapped against their faces, a reminder of the season's bite. Clara inhaled deeply, the chill cutting through her lungs, yet clearing her mind. Days later, she met again with the hospital foundation. This time, the scholarship paperwork was finalized. The director slid a stack of forms across the table, the smell of fresh ink rising as Clara signed her name. Each page turned felt like closing a door on David and Monica, and opening another for strangers who would never leave her bedside. As she placed the final signature, the young nurse from her earlier visit smiled warmly. You're giving more than money, she said. You're giving your name a life beyond you. Clara closed the folder, her hand steady. That's all I want. When she returned home that evening, Alan called with an update. His tone was calm, but the words carried weight. The judge has set the final estate hearing. It will be held in spring. Clara looked out her window, the last frost glinting on the grass. Spring would bring blossoms, yes, but it would also bring the reckoning her son had been running from. The spring air carried a damp chill as Clara Benson stepped into the courthouse, her cane steady against the marble floor. The building smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper, a place where history had been argued line by line. Today, her history was on trial. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with hushed voices and the shuffle of papers. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, striking the polished tables where stacks of files waited like soldiers in formation. David sat at the defense table, jaw clenched, his tie slightly askew. Monica perched beside him, spine ramrod straight, her lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. Alan Pierce rose first, his suit pressed, his voice calm but sharp as glass. Your Honor, he began, this case is not about inheritance. It is about deception, theft, and intimidation. He placed 3 binders on the table in front of Judge Caldwell, each one tabbed and labeled with meticulous care. One by one, Alan laid out the evidence. Fraudulent caretaker paperwork. Bank withdrawal attempts flagged as false. The pawnshop receipts with David's signature, paired with the recovered silver bracelet and cameo brooch, And finally, the letter, David's own handwriting, threatening his mother. Each piece clicked into place like bricks building a wall. The courtroom air grew heavier with every page turned. David shifted in his seat, sweat glinting faintly at his hairline. Monica crossed her legs and stared ahead, her jaw tight enough to crack. When it was Clara's turn, she rose carefully. The hush deepened. She walked to the witness stand, her cane tapping softly, her steps measured. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Alan approached. "Mrs. Benson," he asked gently, "why are we here today?" Clara's eyes lifted, calm and steady. Her voice carried across the chamber, firm, without needing to rise. "Because while I lay in a hospital bed, my son celebrated with champagne. Because when I needed presence, I was given absence. And when I chose to leave my legacy to others, he tried to steal it, piece by piece." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Clara continued, unflinching. "I was not incompetent. I was not confused. I was not weak. I was alone. And he made that choice." Her testimony hung in the air, weighted and unshakable. Alan gave a small nod, then stepped back. Judge Caldwell leaned forward, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. She picked up the letter again, David's threat scrawled across the page. Then she glanced at the pawn slips, at the bank alerts, at the notarized affidavits. Silence stretched, broken only by the faint ticking of the courtroom clock. Finally, she spoke. "The will stands as filed. The evidence of fraud, theft, and intimidation is undeniable. This court upholds Mrs. Benson's decisions, and any inheritance claims by David Benson are void." Her gavel struck, the sound reverberating through the chamber like thunder. David sagged back into his chair, the fight draining from his shoulders. His face collapsed into something raw, caught between disbelief and shame. Beside him, Monica sat rigid, her nails digging crescents into her palm. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at Clara either. She stared, straight ahead, her mouth a flat, hard line. Clara stood, her cane steady, and walked from the courtroom with her head high. The light from the tall windows fell across her shoulders, haloing her in calm resolve. Outside, the air smelled faintly of wet stone and blossoms, spring reminding her that endings and beginnings often came in the same breath. Alan joined her on the courthouse steps. "It's done," he said simply. Clara inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs. "No," she corrected softly, "it's begun." Behind them, David stumbled out of the courthouse, Monica trailing a few steps behind. She didn't wait for him. She didn't touch his arm. She pulled her phone from her bag, her fingers flying across the screen, her jaw locked tight. Later that night, as Clara sipped tea with Joan, the phone on her counter buzzed with an alert. A headline scrolled across the screen. "Monica Benson files for divorce." Clara set her cup down slowly, her lips curling into the faintest, knowing smile. The storm was unraveling from within. The divorce papers hit David's doorstep with the force of a gavel. Monica's signature was bold, almost theatrical, the ink pressed deep into the page as if she had carved her exit into permanence. The courier's knock still echoed in his ears when he tore open the envelope and scanned the words that confirmed it: dissolution, irreconcilable differences, division of debt. Monica didn't just walk away. She walked away with her reputation in tatters. Her friends, once eager to brunch and gossip at her side, now whispered about the courtroom spectacle, about pawn slips and stolen heirlooms, about a woman who had hitched her name to a sinking ship. By the time she left their house, suitcase wheels bumping down the driveway, her sunglasses couldn't hide the fury and humiliation twisting her face. David watched from the doorway, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "You can't just," he started, his voice cracking. Monica didn't stop walking. "Watch me," she shot back, slamming the car door so hard the sound echoed through the neighborhood. In the weeks that followed, David's world shrank. The court had ruled restitution for the pawned heirlooms, plus Alan's attorney fees, plus penalties for the fraudulent filings. Bills piled up one after another, their red-lettered warnings stacking like accusations on his kitchen counter. The house that once gleamed with Monica's curated touches now felt cavernous and cold, its rooms stripped of her perfumes, her sharp-heeled shoes, her laughter that had often sounded more like a performance than joy. He sold the house at a loss, the walls echoing as movers carried out the last of the furniture. The sound of tape ripping over cardboard was the anthem of his downfall. By summer, David was living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of mildew and fried food from the diner below. The walls were thin enough that he could hear the neighbor's television every night. The bed creaked when he sat on it, and the view from the window was nothing but the flicker of a neon sign advertising discount cigarettes. One evening, hunched over his phone at the chipped kitchen table, he typed a message with trembling thumbs. "Mom, can I come home?" His finger hovered over the send button, but desperation outweighed pride. He tapped it, then stared at the screen as if waiting for salvation to appear in bubbles of typing dots. Miles away, Clara's phone buzzed softly on her nightstand. She picked it up, her glasses perched low on her nose, and read the message. The words blurred, not because of age, but because of everything they carried. Years of absence, entitlement, betrayal. She didn't reply. She didn't even let the message sit there, like an open wound. She pressed her thumb to the screen, hit delete, and the words vanished into silence. Across the table, Joan watched. They were sharing tea in Clara's kitchen, steam curling gently in the lamplight. "What did he say?" Joan asked. Clara slid the phone back onto the table, face down. "Nothing that matters." Joan's eyes softened, but her voice was steady. "That's emptiness, Clara. And sometimes emptiness is the only answer." The quiet stretched between them, filled only by the faint clink of spoons against china. Outside, the cicadas hummed, their endless chorus a reminder that life continued, indifferent to loss. In his apartment, David stared at his silent phone until the battery died. The room darkened around him, the neon glow bleeding faintly through the blinds. He pressed his palms to his face, but there was no hiding from the truth. He was alone, no Monica, no inheritance, no audience for his grievances. Meanwhile, Clara found peace in small rituals, folding laundry in the sunlit living room, arranging flowers in the vase by her window, walking slowly down the block with her cane tapping against the sidewalk. She no longer checked David's posts, no longer tracked Monica's complaints. Their noise had faded into static, but silence never lasted long. A week later, Clara opened her mailbox and found an envelope not from lawyers, not from David, but from a local paper. Inside was a neatly folded letter on newsroom stationery. "Mrs. Benson," it began. "We've followed your court case closely. The community deserves to hear your story, in your own words. Would you be willing to sit down for an interview?" Clara stood in the doorway, the paper fluttering slightly in her hand as a warm breeze stirred the air. Her cane tapped once against the threshold. The world had tried to strip her voice away. Now it was asking her to speak. The article appeared on a Sunday morning, the kind of edition people lingered over with coffee and buttered toast. Across the front page of the Marigold Gazette was a headline that refused to be ignored. "Nurse leaves legacy to hospital, not family." Beneath it, a photo of Clara Benson filled half the fold. She sat in her living room, sunlight pouring through lace curtains onto rows of donated books stacked neatly behind her. The reporter had captured something the court couldn't: her calm dignity, the steady light in her eyes. The story stretched over 2 full pages, weaving her decades as a nurse with the battles she had fought in recent months. It spoke of the scholarship fund, of the stolen heirlooms, of the courtroom victories that had affirmed her choice. Every line hummed with the contrast between abandonment and resolve. A son who had left her alone in a hospital bed, and a mother who had chosen to leave her strength to strangers who would honor it. By noon, the town was buzzing. At the farmer's market, Clara's name passed between stalls of fresh strawberries and sunflowers. At the diner, waitresses poured coffee and said, "Did you see what she did?" That's Grit neighbors stopped in their driveways, paper tucked under their arms, shaking their heads with both admiration and disbelief. One line in particular seemed to echo everywhere. She turned betrayal into legacy. For David, the article was a mirror he couldn't shatter. At his cramped apartment, he pulled the paper from his doorstep and skimmed the story, his hands trembling. By the time he reached the second page, where his actions were laid bare, the fraudulent filings, the pawn slips, the threatening letter, his face flushed hot. The words weren't just ink. They were a verdict, delivered by his own community. He shoved the paper into the trash, but the shame lingered. At the grocery store, neighbors avoided his eyes. On the sidewalk, whispers trailed after him. He stopped answering his phone altogether, his world shrinking to the square footage of a single dim apartment. Clara, by contrast, found herself greeted with warmth wherever she went. One afternoon, she walked with Joan into the corner cafe, the smell of roasted beans wrapping around them. A young woman at the counter spotted her and whispered, "That's her." By the time Clara reached the register, the barista smiled brightly and said, "Your tea is on the house today, Mrs. Benson. Thank you for what you've done." Clara inclined her head, accepting quietly, her cane tapping softly on the tile as she made her way to a table. She didn't bask in it. She didn't need to. Later that week, Joan read the article aloud at lunch, her voice animated as she emphasized certain passages. "Listen to this," she said, tapping the page. She gave her inheritance not to those who abandoned her, but to the nurses who will never abandon others. Joan lowered the paper and grinned. "Clara, they've written you into history," Clara chuckled softly, spooning soup into her bowl. "History will forget, but those scholarships will not." After Joan left that afternoon, Clara sat at her kitchen table, scissors in hand. She clipped the article carefully, smoothing its edges before slipping it into her scrapbook. The pages already held photographs of her nursing days, cards from patients, yellowed clippings of health campaigns she'd once championed. Now, this story nestled among them, not an ending, but a testament. As she pressed the scrapbook closed, the doorbell rang. On her porch stood the young reporter, notepad in hand, cheeks flushed from the spring air. "Mrs. Benson," he said, a touch of nervous energy in his voice. "The article has drawn more attention than we expected. The community is rallying around you." Clara raised an eyebrow, amused. "Attention fades, son." "It always does." The reporter hesitated, then leaned forward, his pen hovering. "Maybe. But before it does, tell me, how do you define a gift now?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any headline. The kitchen glowed with morning light, soft beams stretching across the table and catching the rim of the porcelain teacups. The smell of chamomile lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of honey. Clara sat across from Joan, their hands steadying saucers as steam curled gently upward. It was quiet, but not the hollow quiet of hospital rooms or court chambers. This was a peaceful silence, broken only by the clink of silver spoons and the occasional creak of the old house settling into spring. On the table sat a stack of envelopes, each one bearing the letterhead of the hospital foundation. Clara slid the top one open, her hands firm now, not trembling. The paper inside was thick, its ink fresh. She read aloud, her voice even but tinged with warmth. "Dear Mrs. Benson, because of your gift, 2 nursing students will begin their education this fall. Your name will live not only in our records, but in the hearts of those who carry your legacy forward." Joan leaned back, her eyes glistening, though her tone remained as dry as ever. "Better than throwing pearls before swine, I'd say." Clara smiled faintly, her gaze drifting over the neat handwriting. She folded the letter carefully, smoothing its edges, and set it atop the pile. Another envelope waited. She opened it too. This one carried a single line that struck deeper than she expected. Peace belongs to those who stand by you. She repeated it aloud, the words soft but deliberate, as though weighing their truth. Joan nodded slowly, stirring her tea. They got that right. Later that afternoon, Clara took her usual walk down the block, cane tapping steadily against the sidewalk. The air smelled of cut grass and lilacs drifting from a neighbor's garden. Children rode their bikes in looping circles, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Good morning, Mrs. Benson," one neighbor called, waving from her porch. Another leaned over his fence, smiling, saw the article. "Good for you, Clara." She returned their greetings with a small nod, her heart swelling with a quiet gratitude. Where once she had been invisible, overlooked in her own family, she now found herself recognized. Not for scandal, not for pity, but for strength. David was nowhere. No calls, no appearances, not even a whisper from neighbors who once knew him as the Benson boy. He had evaporated into the shadow of his own choices, leaving nothing behind but the echo of mistakes too heavy to outrun. That evening, Clara returned home and settled into her armchair by the window. The scrapbook rested on her lap, the article clipped neatly inside, letters from the foundation tucked between pages. She ran her hand slowly over the cover, the leather cool beneath her palm. Her gaze shifted to the closet door down the hall, behind which sat the safe. Its steel walls held her final words to the world. The will locked tight, her legacy sealed away from the son who had chosen absence over presence. Joan, sitting nearby with her knitting needles clicking faintly, broke the silence. "You've done it, Clara. You've written your story without them. They'll search for a line in it someday, but there won't be one left." Clara looked toward the window, where the last light of day spilled across her garden. The flowers bent gently in the breeze, alive and untroubled. "I gave them every chance," she said softly. "All they gave me in return was emptiness." Her voice didn't falter. If anything, it grew steadier, more resolute. "So I gifted them nothing but emptiness in my will." The words lingered, carried through the room like a closing chapter, final yet unshakably clear.